How many words can you write in a day? 2,000? 5,000? 10,000? With my last novel, I settled on 5,500 words a day, but I'm not a particularly fast writer. In fact, on average, it took me 5 hours and 48 minutes to reach this target. And so when I hurt my back and found that sitting for long periods led to back pain, I needed a way to limit the time I spent writing. I needed to write faster, so I searched for books on this topic, and one stood out above the rest: 2K to 10K. With a little experimentation, I had discovered that I could still heal while sitting 4 hours a day. So I decided to put the knowledge in 2K to 10K to the ultimate test and see if it would allow me to write 5,000 words in just 4 hours. So we're going to do it. Let's just go over here, deliver to John's Kindle, and so I bought the book, and now it's time to load it up on my Kindle and get started. So let's start here with the table of contents. Part 1, I went from writing 2,000 words a day to 10,000 words a day. If writing feels like pulling teeth, you're doing it wrong. Definitely agree with that statement so far. How I plot a novel in 5 easy steps, characters who write their own stories, the story archetype, 2-bird minimum, editing for people who hate editing, what advice you have for new writers, and then we came to the end. I wanted to start writing so bad because I was already into the second week of what was supposed to be 1 month of writing, and I hadn't written a single word. But after seeing the table of contents, I knew I couldn't start yet. I think it makes the most sense to not start with the actual writing quickly stuff, and instead start with the information that's more about planning and setting up, because it wouldn't hurt to spend an extra day to get the planning set up as well as I can so that I can write as efficiently as possible. So I'm going to start by actually reading part 2 instead of part 1 so that I can get the most out of this before I start writing. Step 4 for plotting process is actually some pretty new interesting information for me, and I definitely want to tackle some of these things today. So timeline. I think this could really be useful for me, especially during the fun and games and the bad guys close in, because trying to make Ella and Lucian's stories line up and actually somehow make sense in a chronological manner is pretty difficult, and one of their journeys is potentially going to be longer than the other. So this is something that was kind of worrying me when I was figuring out the bad guys close in. So I think that going through and figuring out a timeline for all of these characters right now would be a really useful thing for me to do before I get started, just to resolve these issues and not have that tugging at the back of my mind while I'm trying to write. And the next thing I think I'm going to do today as well is organizing things into chapters, as she talked about. And I didn't do this with the first book. I just wrote as scenes all the way through, but I think organizing things into chapters might be a better way to go about the writing process rather than just writing through all the scenes for the characters. If I do this, then I can actually write the book as the reader might read it, and I can get a better sense for if it's feeling like it's all making sense that way. Okay, so I've added a lot of things to the timeline, as you can see, and I managed to get up to the all is lost for every single character. So now all I have to do is go through for the last few of these scenes for all of them. So I just worked through every single scene in the story. So basically I organized all the scenes here into chapters that ended up being events here. So today was definitely a lot of work. I expected the timeline to be a little bit easier to make than it actually was. It took quite a bit of time. However, it feels so much better to have that figured out. Also, because I was figuring out specific timings of these events and each event occurs at a specific time, I organized my scenes into chapters based on their time. So I was able to do 2 things with regard to the suggestions in this book. I finished the timeline and it helped me to organize my novel. But now I'd already spent 1 day that should have been writing time. At this point, I really wanted to write even more, but I knew that I still had more setup to do for 2K to 10K. So yesterday we handled the timeline and scene list, and now it is time to move on to one of the other important factors that I think will help me, and that is memorizing everyone's particulars. We're talking physical descriptions of characters and places especially. I'm going to go through for all the things that are relevant for this specific book. I'm going to have to backfill the other ones with descriptions from the story, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm going to focus on the stuff that's relevant for this story because that's what I'm actually trying to get into the writing for as soon as possible. Fortunately, at this point, I've already written down all the characters' names and some basic descriptions about them, but I'm going to be relying on an interesting feature that I just discovered recently here, which is adding a template, and I'm going to use the character bio template from Plottr to fill out the various information and physical descriptions for the characters. I'm not going to fill out beyond the physical description really. I might put in like religion because that can potentially be relevant, but other stuff I'm not too worried about right now, so I'm not going to worry about that stuff. If I have to write something about that and make a decision there, I can just fill it in at that time. These are all the characters that are going to be present in book 2. I went through for a bunch of them and added these character bios, but I also realized that there were a lot of characters that I still hadn't actually created here and I hadn't actually named. So I went through and I added a bunch of these characters that I hadn't created yet. Finished creating character bios for every single character that is present in this second book. So next, I'm going to start figuring out descriptions for the places that will be relevant to the second book as well. So I went through the entire story arc for all the characters, the timeline really, and I tried to figure out all the different places that I need to describe, and unfortunately a lot of these places I have not named yet, so I'm gonna have to name a lot of places first. For some of the places, like for instance this city, I wanted to describe different aspects of it, like what it's like outside, what it's like inside, what the front gate looks like, you know, stuff that's relevant for this specific story and that will most likely be relevant for other ones as well. That took longer than I thought. I finished the descriptions for all of these various different places. Some of them were simpler and some of them were more complicated. For instance, this is one that there's lots of different rooms that need to be described. I finally finished naming all of these things and describing all of these things and people. It took a whole day to work through all of these character and place descriptions, and I was grateful to have done it, but I was starting to doubt whether all of this setup would be worth it. Finally, I finished most of the stuff in the 4th step of actually preparing to write the novel, but when I was reading, I realized there was so much that I needed to do that I didn't actually finish the 4th step. I didn't actually finish reading it. So I had this last little thing, the boredom check, to read over and see what I can learn from here. Okay, so it only took me about a minute to stop recording because this section is really, really interesting. Probably my favorite thing that I read in this book so far. Ripping a scene out of a finished plot can feel really scary, but this is all part of the be excited about everything you write component of the 2K to 10K writing triangle. She's going to talk about that earlier. It's much better to stop and think of a new scene now when rearranging the story is easy than to try and wrestle with a dull scene further down the road. And this stands out to me so much because this is probably one of the biggest things that I struggle with when writing. It's that feeling of realizing that you're in a scene and you're not excited about it. And what I'm realizing about this first step of her planning before writing, it's all of these steps that help you reduce the amount of doubt that you have in your mind while you're writing so that you can write more freely and more smoothly. So through this exercise that she talks about, the boredom check of going through the scenes and visualizing them and seeing what moments are feeling boring, through doing this, you can find these moments that aren't exciting enough and figure out ways to get them out or improve them. Okay, so I'm gonna be honest with you here. I took a long break. I read and I did some Japanese on the phone. I'm really struggling with motivation right now because I'm so tired. My brain feels so worthless. And speaking in Japanese with this brain, it was very difficult. This is like the 3rd day that I haven't gotten a full night of sleep. It's really starting to add up and I'm just not feeling good. And that is why I'm having trouble getting back into doing this work, because I know this work is hard. I know that it's going to be difficult. To be quite honest, we're already on the 3rd day of the 2nd week here and I haven't even started writing yet because I've been doing all of this planning before writing. I'm very close to starting and all I have to do is actually finish this visualizing today and I will be able and ready to start writing. So I'm very much excited for that, but I'm just struggling with motivation right now because of how tired I am. But you know what? I'm going to work anyway. I'm going to do this because I really want to improve my skills as a writer. I really want to crush this novelist apprenticeship challenge and learn as much as I can. I want to apply the lessons that I'm learning here to write faster. So I need to get into actually doing this work, visualizing these scenes, and making some progress. So let's just do this. Come on. So I just finished working through and visualizing all of the rest of the scenes in the entire story. That was relatively tiring, honestly. But it was definitely a good thing to take care of, because by trying to visualize all the scenes, I'm basically clarifying that I understand what happens in them, that I know how they're going to start, that I know what's going to progress in them, and that I know how they're going to end. And having those details is key to actually being able to write the scene quickly. This is actually something I discovered a while back with my beginning, middle, and end in the outline. I stopped doing it, though, because I felt like it was redundant in a lot of the cases with scenes. So I actually like this more, because instead of just doing beginning, middle, and end for every single scene, regardless of whether or not I can already visualize it, this just forces me to look and see, am I visualizing it? Am I able to understand it? Do I know what's going to happen? And if I do, then I don't need anything else. If I don't, then I can add more detail to my outline so that I actually know when I come to write this scene what's going to happen. And now I've finished every single step in step 4 of the planning process, and I'm pretty sure that step 5 is starting to write. Yes, it is. And now I'm finally ready to start at part 1, the part talking about how to actually write faster when you're in the process of writing. So let's just get into it, shall we? Okay, so I just got to an interesting quote from the book, and as you can see, many people, 3,700, highlighted this. If you want to write faster, the first step is to know what you're writing before you write it. And I resonate with this so much because I know that the slowest scenes that I've written are the ones where I get into it and I start writing before I even really know what's going to happen. I know the goal, the conflict, and the unexpected outcome, but I don't know how we're going to get to that point. And getting there can end up taking a long time and wasting a lot of words and writing. So sitting down beforehand and actually figuring out exactly what you're going to write seems like a really good idea to me. And like the visualizing beforehand, this is one that scales too. So if you already know exactly what you're going to write and it comes to you really quickly and you jot everything down, you're ready to write, then you can do it. But if you start thinking about the scene, you realize you really don't know what's going to happen, then you have the space to figure that out before you actually start writing. Okay, so I just got to one of the most interesting parts in the book. So she says, the days where I broke 10K were the days when I was writing scenes I'd been dying to write since I planned the book. And this definitely corresponds with my own intuitions that I've had when I was writing. Like toward the end of the book, when you're writing the most interesting scenes, it seems to flow so much faster. I do definitely think that the excitement around scenes is super important. And the advice that she gives about this, it corresponds well to what she said for the knowledge section. When you're sitting down and trying to come up with these ideas for the scene and make sure that you actually understand what's going to happen, try to visualize the scene and find what part of it is the most interesting for you. What part of the scene is the part that you're looking forward to writing? And by finding this part of the scene, then you have something to work toward and to motivate the whole scene. And one thing that she said that I really like about this as well is if you don't find anything that does this for you, then you should change the scene or remove it entirely. I really love this because far too often I've found myself writing scenes and by the time I get to the end of it, I realized, you know, that wasn't really that good of a scene and I had to force my way through it rather than being drawn through it by the interest of what is going to happen and just enjoying the process of writing the scenes. And that is where I'm going to close off with for this book here. And finally, I was ready to take on the challenge. Could what I learned in 2K to 10K help me to write 5,500 words in just 4 hours? Okay, so now that I've finished gathering the knowledge, planning the story, and figuring out what steps I'm going to take to apply it when I'm actually writing, it's time to finally start. So today I'm going to be trying to do this writing like Rachel Aaron suggests in this book. So how I'm going to apply this is that before every session, I'm going to take some time to write out what I'm going to be writing in advance. And also I'm going to visualize the scene and try to figure out what is the most important part of the scene and figure out the most exciting part of the scene and then use that to get myself excited to write it. Okay, so I'm going to start by using this first event. I know which scenes this is going to apply to based on the description. We can look at these two scenes that I'm going to be writing with the opening image scene and one of the setup scenes which occurs just after the opening image. So we're going to be writing these two scenes in this first session. So that's what I'm going to write about in my legal pad first. Okay, so that potentially took a little bit longer than her 5 minutes or whatever, but I do feel like I have a much better idea of what I'm going to be writing here. I wrote out a bunch of notes. Basically, I have the first scene of the chapter, then I wrote like the most exciting part of that, as well as the reaction scene afterward, and I didn't actually choose the most exciting part of it, but I guess it's this portion here. My handwriting sucks, so that'll work. Anyway, so I'm going to be able to use this to go through, and if I'm ever feeling lost, like I don't really know what the next step is, then I can just look at my notes and see which I'm going to be writing next. So it is 7:20 and I've written 1,835 words. This actually went pretty darn well. I managed to write this amount in just under 2 hours, and 10 minutes of that was me doing my planning, and another 15 to 20 was me filming. So all in all, I think I wrote this amount in about 90 minutes, which is pretty darn good for me. So this is seeming to work pretty well, and I found that the notes were actually really helpful because when I had a moment where I just wasn't really sure what was going to happen next, all I had to do was look back and see, okay, well, what's the next bullet point? And then I could figure out how I was going to get from where I currently was to that next bullet point. Okay, so I'm back and ready to continue with my writing. I was laying down for quite a while and my back is feeling pretty fresh. However, I was hoping that I would feel a little bit more awake at this point. As I said yesterday, I haven't been sleeping that well. I did sleep pretty well last night, but I guess it's just still some lingering tiredness. Despite that, hopefully I'll be able to write pretty quickly and give 2K to 10K a real shot here. So I'm going to continue with this next chapter here, which is the first for Lucian, the first in his perspective, and it will also contain 2 scenes. It's going to contain the opening image as well as the first of the setup scenes. So once again, let's start off with my notebook, and then I'll be ready to get started on the writing. So it is 10:25 and I've gotten to 3,284 words. So I was able to finish all of Lucian's chapter. It was a little bit shorter than Ella's, but this one was fun to write as well, and I wrote this entire chapter in just 50 something minutes. So that was pretty quick for over 1,000 words. Things are looking pretty good so far. My goal was writing 5,500 words in 4 hours, and I did not achieve that. I only wrote 5,296 words, but as you can see from my smile, that's not very much of an only. So to write over 5,000 words in 4 hours is just ridiculous. That is so much faster than I'm used to, and the writing was just better. When I was planning out these scenes, I was like, oh my god, this scene is going to be awesome. I was really feeling good about this, like, wow, I'm actually getting better as a writer. I can see myself improving. Maybe it's just the practice of coming up with all these details for each of the scenes beforehand, but I was excited about every single one of these scenes when I was writing it, and so I can't really say whether that's just me growing as a writer, hopefully, or I can attribute that to this process of detailing things out before the scene. I think it's probably a little bit of both. But anyway, today was an awesome day of writing. To be honest, I was really skeptical of this book going into this. I was worried that I might be wasting my money, that I would spend all this time reading the book and I wouldn't be able to write any faster, and I would be behind on my Novelist Apprenticeship Challenge, but as you have just seen, it did not turn out that way at all. I was able to write faster, I felt like I was writing better, and even more than that, I enjoyed the writing process more than I think I've ever enjoyed it because I was so enthusiastic going into each of these scenes. So overall, this was an amazing experience. But unfortunately, there were a lot of useful lessons from this book that I was not able to share in this video. So if you want to buy the whole thing, I will include a link down in the description. And if you do decide to purchase from this link, it will help support this channel because I really want to get better audio quality. There is too much echo in this room and I need a directional mic already, so doing that would really help me out. Anyway, that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this has helped you, and I will see you in the next one.